А тепер? Знову є. Угу. Знову є. Окей. Добре, давайте розпочинати. Я зараз перезавантажую комп'ютер, Поліна розпочне, і далі ми продовжимо. Ми зараз вирішимо це питання. Добре? Окей.
Окей. Good.
Я перепрошую за технічні труднощі, що в нас виникли на початку. Але гадаю, що нам потрібно вже розпочинати. І хочу розпочати з того, що рік тому нам прийшла ідея створення лабораторії українського доку. Нам дуже приємно сьогодні відкривати першу лекцію з Мікаелем Опструпом для широкої аудиторії. І ми дуже вдячні Мікаелю, що він погодився і відразу відгукнувся на нашу пропозицію організації лабораторії для українських кінематографістів. І в мене зараз дуже дивні відчуття, але приємні, що минув лише рік після того, як нам прийшла ця ідея по створенню лабораторії, а ми вже маємо першу лекцію. І я щиро вдячна нашим колегам Наді Грачовій, Валентині Тужині, що вони підтримали цю авантюру і занурилися з головою в роботу. І з досвіду колег та свого власного можу сказати, що знаю, наскільки це непросто, але важливо отримати підтримку своїм ідеям, що коли вони знаходяться на стадії такого зачаточному.
At the initial stage, because the support at the development stage impacts a lot on the further work. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we have very few funds, very few institutions who would support documentary films at the stage of development. Because usually the development stage, as we know, at this stage, we can understand whether the film be successful, whether you have interesting characters and how to work with them further. So this is sort of ambitious goal, ambitious aim of our team is to open additional opportunities for Ukrainian documentary creators, colleagues to develop their ideas, to support them until the stage of production. This is why we concentrate on international education, international training. We invite professional experts in this work who have experience in the modern documentary market. And I think that this new knowledge and skills will help you to create new, bright films. But the most important thing that we are trying to create is we are trying to have common vision in different direction of Ukrainian cinema sphere. We don't plan to stop. We will continue in the next year. So follow our news, follow us. Together, we will be able to overcome the obstacles and to create something great. I would like to give the microphone to Nadia Grachova, and she will talk about our future events. Thank you, Paulina. Good day, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure that you are all interested. You expressed your interest and connected to our training. We hope that these 2 hours will bring you the most benefits. And from our laboratory, we would like to personally thank to Mikael for finding time in his tight schedule. I would like to remind you that Mikael is an international expert for preparatory session at the initial stages of production of documentaries. He was leading. He works in different organizations, CDOCS, Baltics, and he is a great expert. We have a long list of his achievements. As for the statistics, over 80 participants registered for the lecture, including producers, directors, script writers, and others. It means that Ukrainian cinematography is developing in the recent years because we are changing. The format of cooperation and training is changing. We have this possibility to boost our skills together with international experts, not only in theory, but in practice as well, which brings better results. And I would like to note that besides our laboratory is only several months old, we have very professional circle. We had a lot of applications for individual lectures with Michael. And as evidence, our partner Kharkiv Midocs Festival selected 6 projects for international pitching that will take place on the 1st of October in the mid-film industry industrial section. So what is our agenda for today? During the lecture, please don't turn off your cameras. This is important because Michael will be telling us very important and useful information. We need to mute ourselves. Our administrators will check this. And during the lecture, you can write your questions into the chat, preferably in English. This will be better for Michael. You can write in Ukrainian as well, and later we will have a Q&A session when you will be able to personally ask questions. And Valentina will tell you about our following days. Thank you, Nadia. On my side, I would like to tell you about the program of lectures and events in the laboratory. Today, 23rd of September, we will have the first lecture of Mikael Opstrup, Do I Know What I'm Presenting? Tomorrow, we will have a more tight day from 16 to 18. Tomorrow, September 24, we will have the second lecture, Elements of Pitching. From 18 to 19, we will have a break. And at 19 o'clock, we will be waiting for everybody to participate in the discussion about films. This reign will never end between Mikael, director Alina Horlova, and producer Maxim Nakonechny. For our laboratory participants, we will have a free link to view this picture during 24 hours. In the end of the lecture, we will send you a link to view the materials, and we will send materials to all the participants who have registered in our laboratory. The discussion about the film will be from 19 until 21. On the 25th of September, on Sunday, from 16 to 18, we will have the third lecture from Mikael, Fora and Markets. From 18 to 19, we will have a break. At 19 o'clock, we will be waiting for you to participate in discussion in the film Home Games. And the film, which is still in the process of production, the 49 expedition between Mikael, Alisa Kovalenko and Stefan Siohan, the producer. The link for those films will be sent to all the registered participants one day before the discussion. And the link will be active for 24 hours. On Sunday, September 26, from 11 to 15, we will have a public presentation of 5 shortlisted projects in our laboratory who participated in individual sessions with Mikael. This is all about our agenda, and I would also like to emphasize that this project is supported by Ukrainian Culture Fund in partnership with the festival Kharkiv Midoks and Ukrainian Guild of Directors. State Film of Ukraine, SUG, and Terrarium Platform are our information partners. Thank you, Mikael. I'm giving the word to you.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome from Copenhagen in Denmark. I was just listening to your introduction of what's going to happen the next days, and I have the feeling that I will be more in Ukraine than I will be in Denmark, and that's actually a nice feeling. I would also refer to what one of you just said, Valentina, Polina, or Nadia, I can't remember, that you who are here, you're very welcome to put on your camera. You know, it's a strange thing to sit here and talk out into something. So the more I can get a sense of there are some real people of flesh and blood out there, the better for me, I must say. So if it's okay with you that you put on your camera, it's really, really fine with me. As mentioned, we'll have today and tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, there will be 3 lectures by me. And you're very welcome to post questions in the chat during the lecture. It's going to be 3 times 2 hours with me in the coming 3 days. You will all die a slow death if you're only going to listen to me for 3 times 2 hours. So I'm sure that during the lectures, I will say something that you will disagree with, or you will not understand, or you have a comment from your own experience that you would like to add. So please, please do that. As mentioned in the introduction, we will, by the end, we will have a Q&A, or maybe not a Q&A, because it does not have to be questions from your side. It can also be comments. But we will invite you all to participate in a discussion. But we don't need to wait until that. If you have something that you would like me to address, please write it in the chat. And as mentioned, if you can write it in English, then I can understand it. If you write it in Ukrainian, then Nadja or Valentina or Polina can translate it. Today, I would like to focus on what I chose to give the headline, Do I Know What I'm Presenting? It will be the genre of documentary, and it will be about the subgenres of documentaries. Tomorrow, I will be talking about the pitching elements, as mentioned. One of them is, of course, trailers. And I will show some different trailers tomorrow. Today, I will not show anything. I'll just show myself. But tomorrow, I would like to show some trailers and talk about the visual part of pitching. I will do a little test pitch where I would pitch a project for you. So I will also talk about the verbal part of pitching. And then finally, the written presentation, you know, this two-page presentation that we often have to deliver when we present the project. And then finally, the day after tomorrow, as Valentina mentioned, the forums and the market. I will try to talk about the different pitching forums that are out there. There are so many all year around. And I would try to talk a little about the market. How does it look? Who are the players? Broadcasters, film funds, sales agents, and so on. So try to give this little overview of how does the market look. And it is changing rapidly these days. So it's difficult, but I will try to do that tomorrow. But today, as mentioned, do I know what I'm presenting? I chose to give it that title because I feel that sometimes we're not quite sure what it actually is that we have on our hands when we present. And I think that is important, that we have sort of analyzed what are the elements in our own stories. I think one of the reasons why it's sometimes difficult is that, as far as I can see, documentary is the only art form where all the building stones are beyond our control. Now that's scary, but it's also very interesting to work with an art form where we do not control the building stones. And it's one of the reasons why I have been in this business for so many years, that I find that extraordinarily interesting. You know, the writer or the painter or the sculptor, they are 100% in control of the art. They can see it grow in front of their eyes. And the writer can rewrite the book, the painter can repaint the canvas, and finally when it's done, they can see it in front of their eyes. It's a little different with script writing for fiction, with composing music and so on, because you are in control of your own process. The scriptwriter is in full control of his script or her script. The composer is in full control of composing the music, but the process is interrupted and someone else takes over. The orchestra and the conductor takes over. The director and his actors or her actors take over the script. So you are in control of your own process, but it's different from writing a book or painting a picture because someone else is taking over. And then you have documentary filmmaking, which is the opposite. You do not have a script where you write characters. You have real people that you meet. You don't have locations. You have the places where real people are living. And you have no control of what they are doing. In most cases, I'll come back to that. But in general, what you have to do as a director is that you have to be able to identify a potential story. So it's not a story that you can control. It's a story that you have to foresee, so to speak. I'll come back to that even more tomorrow, because there I will be talking about pitching, where you will be presenting a story that doesn't exist. And that's an interesting achievement to be able to do that. But today I will try to talk more about the different genres within documentary. And I would actually like to start by talking about, as far as I can see within filmmaking, at least 3 genres that we have. On one side, we have fiction film. On another side, we have journalism. And in between, we have documentary film that combines elements from journalism and combines elements from fiction film. Fiction film is always story-driven. It's always characters who undergo a certain development and they drive the story forward. So in that sense, fiction film is pretty simple. It's maybe the simplest of these 3 genres: fiction, journalism, and documentary film. You write a story, you shoot it, and you edit it. It's as simple as that. Then you have journalism, which is a cousin of documentary film. Very often, a journalistic driven film is subject driven. It's the investigation into a subject that drives the journalistic film forward. It's about informing. It's about giving answers, as opposed to documentary film, where you usually want to raise questions rather than giving answers. But I think it's the journalistic ambition to provide some answers to the questions that you are examining in the journalistic driven documentary. It's about objectivity. Although we all know that objectivity doesn't exist 100%, I believe that it is still the ambition of the journalist to be objective. This is what happened. I think that if a journalist shows his film to people who are in the film, I think that the ambition of the response that the journalist wants from the people who are in his or her film is, yes, this is what happened. Then the journalist has achieved the mission. There are some tools that very often characterizes a journalistic driven documentary. It's interviews, it's voiceover. And it is also that you very often, when you edit a journalistic driven documentary, you edit on the subject, so to speak, not on the story. And by that I mean that you gradually dive deeper and deeper into examining the subject. And that is also what drives your editing forward. It's not necessarily following a certain character. Very often in a journalistic driven documentary, you see that you edit 5 seconds from one character, 20 seconds from another character, 30 seconds from a third character, etc. And then you may go back to the first character again. So you're not following your characters as such, but you are jumping from one to another in order to dive deeper into a certain subject. That is very often a journalistic method that we see. With documentary film, it's different. And I think the first question that you need to ask yourself when you want to make a documentary film is, what drives the film forward? Is it a story exactly as it is with fiction film? Or is it a subject where you take bits and pieces from the journalistic inspiration that drives your film forward? It's a very, very, very important choice. Because if you decide that your documentary film is character-driven, then you cannot suddenly come in with a voiceover. Then you cannot suddenly come in with an interview. Because then you stop the character drive. So, and analyzing whether certain characters will potentially enable you to tell the story you want to tell is a very, very important decision. Now, I know there are mixed, of course there are, but as a genre, a character-driven documentary does not hold a voiceover that tells us what happens. And it does not hold an interview. It holds a camera that follows what happens in the characters' lives. And that means that it is totally out of your hands what will happen. It's totally in your hands what you decide that ends up in the final film, of course. But if it's character-driven, it might take a turn. That means that the film you're making is different from the film you intended. And I think that's maybe one of the most difficult things in being a documentary director. Because on one hand, you have to decide what your film is about. Otherwise, you don't know what you want to film in the reality. But on the other hand, you also have to be 100%. Lena, can you turn off your mic, please? There we go. So on one hand, you have to be 100% sure what your film is about. At the same time, you have to be 100% open towards the changes that happens with your characters. Because it might mean that the film you wanted to make is not possible to make. And that is a very, I think that's a characteristic about a documentary director that we don't require from anybody else. There are no other artists where you have at the same time to have decided and at the same time being open. That is a characteristic about character-driven documentary, I think, or story-driven documentary. As opposed to a journalistic documentary, it's also subjective. That's what characterizes a documentary film. It is your personal perspective on events that happens in reality. So your ambition is the opposite of the journalist. It is not to present reality as it happened. It's to present your version of reality. So, as mentioned before, if it's the ambition from the journalist when he or she shows the film to the characters in your film, that the character says, yes, this is what happened. I think that the ambition for a documentary director, if you show your film to your characters, that they say, yes, this is what happened, but I just never saw it like that. So you, in a way, make your characters understand their own life differently than they have ever understood it before. So you have to be true to that, what happened. But you interpret it in a way where it's your personal version. And I think what you do is that in documentary filmmaking, you edit on subtext, which means that you read what is actually going on and not what is apparently going on. I'll just interrupt myself shortly because I can see that there are 16 notes in the chat. Is any of it, and it's all in Ukrainian, so I have, I don't know what it is any of it questions that we see
зараз...
Natya, or what do you think?
Just a second. Because this is so far, this is technical information.
Okay.
Because one of the listeners was not able to turn on the interpreting. As soon as we have questions to you, we will let you know.
Okay, very good. So I'll continue. So what do I mean by editing on subtext? I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that I am sitting in my living room together with my son and my daughter. And I turn to my daughter and say, you have no idea how proud it makes me to be your father. Now, the interesting thing is, what is the subtext of that sentence? Is it that I have never told my daughter before how proud she makes me? Or is it that I'm not telling my son how proud I am of him? Now, my son and my daughter and me, we know the subtext because we've been together all our lives. But the audience don't know the subtext unless the documentary director knows the subtext. So if the camera is on my daughter, you can see that she's smiling. So the subtext on the scene, when I see it on the screen, is my daughter is happy. But if the camera is on my son, and you can see how sad he gets, the subtext of the scene when I watch it on the screen will be that. And that is what is difficult about documentary filmmaking. That you need to have read the subtext before it happens. Otherwise, your camera cannot register it. So, and it might also mean that maybe my daughter never knew how sad it made my son. She only finds out when I invite her for the premiere and she sees how sad my son is, because she only saw how happy she was. So that's what I mean by that a documentary director, when showing the film to your protagonists, if they say, yes, this is what happened, but I just never saw it like that before. There's a tricky thing about documentary filmmaking that I think we sometimes, when we are developing a story, that we tend to think that stories happen in reality. So that when we tell about our documentary, we talk about things that happened in reality. But there are no stories in reality. There are only events. Stories are the ones you create when you make your documentary. And I will come back to that tomorrow when we talk about pitching, because that makes it really, really tricky. That we know that by the end of the day, we're going to make a film that is based on stories or that tells stories, but it's based on events. If two directors make a film from the same events, it will be two totally different films. And that's tricky when we are presenting a project fairly early in development, because we don't know exactly what the stories are yet. But of course, it will be different from director to director. So I will come back to that tomorrow. So of course you can say that you can introduce other elements, and we see it a lot. We see very often that we, in a documentary film, use an interview. And we see that we use a voiceover. But I think it's something that we have to be very conscious about when we create the film. If we have a voiceover, for instance, what kind of voiceover is it? Is it a voiceover where the one who talks is a character? Because then I think we can still call it a character-driven film. But if it's a voiceover where a neutral person is explaining something, then we stop the drive of a character. So I think that's a very important decision that we have to make. Is our voiceover representing a character, or is it representing something else? There's a big difference here. I think what sometimes happens when we have a voiceover is that we break the feeling of being present with our characters. I don't know if you have that feeling sometimes, but I very often have the feeling when I watch a character-driven film that I forget that I'm watching a film. I sometimes feel that I'm sitting in the same room as my characters. I emotionally identify with them in a way where I forget that I'm watching a film. And I think this happens when the director keeps what is called the unity of time and space. The unity of time and space means that you do not separate picture from sound, just as it is now. Right now, you're watching me and you're listening to me at the same time. So in a way, it's like being with me. But then if Paulina's voice came in and Paulina started interpreting what I'm saying, you would lose the closeness with me. Or if I didn't move my mouth, but you heard my voice, and it was easy to see that that voice came from another time. It was something I said yesterday or last year. You also break the illusion that you are with me. So you break the unity of time and space, the unity of space and time. I think that sometimes we're not conscious about that. Either we, for instance, have a voiceover or an interview because we cannot cover a certain element in our story without it. For example, it very often happens that we want to include something in our documentary that has already happened. So what do? So very often we use interview and we use a voiceover. And I'm not saying that it's bad or good. I'm just saying we need to be conscious about what it means. And I think what it does is that it very often takes us out of the emotional presence together with the characters. We consciously or unconsciously become aware that we're watching a film. I think that's what happens. Not necessarily, but it is a possible development. Now, we have all seen characters talking directly to the camera, where we don't see it as an interview. If it's emotionally enough, we don't see it as an interview. We don't see it as a piece of information. I'll give you an example. Two versions of the same. Version 1 is the informational version. My wife and I have a problem. I'm too much traveling. We're not together enough. So it might end up with a divorce. That was version 1. Version 2 is, the other night I came home from a travel, as so many times before. When I was outside my house, I could see that there was only light in one window, which is very unusual. So I went up the stairs, opened the door, and I saw my wife sitting in the corner of the sofa with only a small lamp on. And she said, "Mikael, we gotta talk." Before I go on, I have a very fine relationship to my son and daughter, and I love both of them very much. I'm very happily married. I love my wife dearly, and I think she loves me as well. You don't need to worry. But this was basically the version, two versions of the same story. So a talk with a person can be informational, or it can tell a story. In the second version, I hope that I created a scene in your head. The scene that I didn't shoot, I hopefully made you envision. But I didn't do that in the first version. So there are ways of getting around it, because we always have this. There are scenes where we were not there with our camera. But it's a very, very important event for our storytelling. So what do we do? And the only thing I wanted to say with these examples is that we need to decide whether we will try to retell it in a way where we still have the feeling that we are in a story and we are not just being informed. Mikael and his wife have problems. And I think it's the same with a narrator. Is it a narrator, or is it a character that has a position from where he or she speaks? Then it can actually work fine with a voiceover. But we have to establish the person that does the voiceover as a character. It of course raises the question, what is a character? And that is a little difficult to say, but I think there are two, in my vocabulary, there are two characteristics of a character. One is that it is a person that has a project. Something that you need to do, to overcome. You know, it can be a dream that you want to achieve. It could be an obstacle that you need to overcome. I will come back to that more tomorrow when I show you some trailers, and there we will talk more about a character. I think it's also another characteristic is that it is a person with a past, a present, and a future. The past is what happened before you started filming the character or the person. The present is what you're filming. And the future is what I just called a project. The thing that the person in your film wants to achieve. That is my definition of a character. And I'm sure if you ask someone else, you would get a different definition. And my point is not so much whether you agree or disagree with me. My point is just, we need to know. We need to know when we are directors, what is the difference between a person and a character. A person is the one that you meet out on the street when you ask for directions. And the person says, go 2 blocks and turn right. Then you will find the supermarket. That's a person. And one of the tricky things about documentary film is that I think sometimes we know a lot about a certain person, but we don't necessarily film it. So that's what makes documentary filmmaking so complicated, because we have all that information in our heads. So we read it sometimes into the scenes that we show on the screen. But maybe it isn't there. It's the knowledge that you bring because it's real people. That's not a problem in fiction film, because in fiction film, there's only a character. There's only the person that is in the script. So it's very, very simple. There's nothing else than what the director or the scriptwriter creates. But in documentary film, there's a person with a lived life from before you start filming him or her. And it's next to impossible not to read that knowledge into a scene. But it might not be in the scene. So that's really, really tricky. That's what you have an editor for. That's what the editor does. The editor only sees that what's on the screen. So you say, isn't it a fantastic scene about this girl who lost her mother when she was 3? And the editor says, no, because I don't know that she lost her mother when she was 3. Oh, damn it. How do I get that into the scene? You know? So we can also get back to that a little more tomorrow when we talk about pitch trailers, but I always recommend when we do pitch trailers, which we very often do quite early, I always recommend when you've done it, show it to someone who knows nothing about your film. And then ask them, what do you understand? You don't ask them, was it good or bad or interesting or not interesting? Was it funny or sad? No, no, no. What did you understand? I've done it several times when I was producing myself, and I was always surprised. There were always things that I and the director thought was obvious that people didn't get. So it's a very simple, but very interesting exercise, I think. Sometimes a film is not character-driven, it's more director-driven. So it's how the director puts elements together that drives the film forward. And that can be really, really interesting, but it's just important for us to realize ourselves that that is the case. It's the director that takes us from person A to person B and onwards to person C. It's not because there's a story that takes us from A to B to C. This is often the case in what's it called, subject-driven films or theme-driven films. That there is only the action that the director creates. If it's a character-driven film, you're getting action from the people you're filming. But if it's a director-driven film, you don't necessarily get that. You only get the drive that the director puts into the film. So let me not say that now. So I think that what is maybe the most difficult thing for a documentary director, it is to identify the potential story. What is it? What are we looking for? Do we know what we're looking for when we are out there in reality? I think very often what we're looking for are moments. Moments can be turned into scenes. I had a very interesting conversation with a Polish DOP. You may know him. I saw the question. I will come back to it. An example of a director-driven film. Have you seen, unfortunately, I've only seen parts of it, but have you seen the latest film by Viktor Kosakovsky? The film with the pigs? I can see that Alexei has seen it. That's what I would call a director-driven film. It's his interpretation of what's happening that drives the film forward. If you ask another director to film some pigs for some month, you will end up with a completely different film. We also have one at our, of the 5 films that we have at our laboratory here. You don't know them, those of you who are not part of the laboratory, but sorry, help me out now. I forgot the title. The one with the couple that is making art that moved to the countryside. Help me, Polina and Nadja. What is the title? You don't remember either? Anyway, okay. I'll move on.
Timeless Trip.
Sorry?
Timeless Trip.
Yeah, exactly.
Timeless Trip.
Timeless Trip. That is a film that we have in our laboratory this year. And I think that is also a director-driven film. Can I come up with other examples? I'll think about it. I'll come back to it. To come back to my my talk with this DOP, maybe you know him. It's a Polish DOP who's called Wojciech Staun. He has made, for instance, a film called Brothers. He has made another film that is called Argentinian Lessons. If you want to see wonderful filming for documentary, I can only recommend you to watch his films. And he told me he after having made documentary films for many years, he found out what he was looking for when he actually he had done it several years, but he just didn't formulate it to himself before. And by formulating it, it became much clearer for him. He said, I'm looking for 3 different kinds of moments when I'm out there with my camera. First one is the situations that only happens once. The decisive moments in a person's life. My wife leaves me. I lose my job, etc. And the interesting thing is that these moments are very often the moment that drives the film forward. You know, if my wife leaves me and I love her, I got to do something to get her back. Or find another one, but I got to do something. So these moments that only happens once, or hopefully only happens once in your life, that's what I'm looking for, he said. And the only way that I can be there with my camera when they happen is that I have spent a lot of time with my characters. Otherwise, I wouldn't know that today I have to be there with my camera. The other kind of moments that I'm looking for are the everyday events, things that happens all the time. I go to the same bar. I go with the same friend for a walk. I go to church. I always read a book before I go to bed. The routines. The good thing about the routines is that for the first week, I can just be there and observe, because not all routines are interesting. But some of the routines says a lot about my character. So it's the opposite of the first kind of things that he was looking for. And then the third thing are the characters or the locations around my protagonist. Is there something about the location that tells me something about my character? Are there other characters that tells me something about my character? So it's the kind of moments that does not include my character, but that characterizes my character. These are the three kinds of moments that he's looking for. And as he said, the interesting thing is that it's very, very difficult to make a film if you don't have at least two, but hopefully all three kinds of scenes. If you don't have it, it'll be difficult to edit a documentary film. And he also said, when I'm done with editing, I can see that it is moment one, the things that only happens once in a character's life, that structures the film. And then I fill in with moments 2 and moment 3. That was his observation. I thought that was a very, very sharp observation, I must say, and really, really useful. Actually, it's pretty obvious, but you got to be conscious before you can start looking for it. And I think that is the difference. Got a question where it says, Mikael, can you please tell more about location? Which tells something about a hero. Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference, probably, in a character if he lives in a really messy 2-room apartment that hasn't been cleaned for half a year, or it's a character that lives in an apartment where everything is in its place. There's no mess. That probably tells a lot about your character. So sometimes just finding, what is that called? You know, corners of the apartment tells a lot. Sometimes you can open with a film where nothing really happens, the first 10 minutes, you're just with your character in his or her apartment. But when the 10 minutes are gone, you know everything. At least unconsciously, you know everything. And that is, of course, the job of a good DOP. Because you need to be with your character a lot to find out. So what are the small bits and pieces from the apartment that I should remember to film? Because it tells something. The photo hanging on the wall, where the character who is now 50 years old was 5 years and is standing with his mother. Does that mean something? Is that important for the story? Maybe. Maybe not. You should always film it because you never know if you're going to need it, but it might not end up in the film. Because if you have a close-up of a photo on the wall of your main character, 5 years old, together with the mother, then by including it in the film, you say it's important. And if it's not, we confuse our audience. But that's what I meant by that. Yeah, this is actually what I had to say. I know we have 2 hours, but 2 hours is a hell of a long time to talk. So I would prefer if we could open the floor now, because I know I've touched upon a lot of different things. And I would be really curious to hear some of you who are present, some of your experiences, some of your observations, maybe some of your questions that are related to what I've said about journalism, fiction, documentary, about story-driven, or about theme-driven. Sorry, about character-driven or about theme-driven films, about what are we looking for when we are filming our film. How do you deal with the fact that you thought that this might happen and then something completely different happens and it changes your film? How do you deal with that as a director? All these things, what are your thoughts on using interviews, voiceover, archive, and all that in a film, as opposed to not allowing yourself? So I think I will stop here, and please say something. Otherwise, we'll have to be together in 50 minutes with total silence. And that might end up to be pretty boring.
Отже, я прошу підняти
So I'm asking people, please raise your hand. Please, if you would like to share your experience. I know that you have things to say to Mikael. Please don't be shy. Tell us about your experience. Світлана Рудюк. Svetlana, please unmute. I would like you to meet our producer. She is a very well known in Ukraine. She is a scriptwriter and director. She is a kind of person who works for the director, for the scriptwriter. They are digging into this. So please share with us, share your experience regarding the protagonists and locations. Good day. I am very pleased to be here on the first seminar. thanks to everybody who connected, and thanks to Mikael. It was really interesting to hear about your experience. As a producer and director, I also have my interesting experience. You said that we need to move either by character or by story drive. So I started shooting a character-driven story about a Ukrainian sculptor, Mykola Shmatko, but my protagonist died while I was looking for funding. So I decided to move this story into a feature sphere. So now I'm working on a feature film, but I have decided that the experience that I have acquired, I wouldn't leave it alone. So I chose a mockumentary. I want to combine a documentary and a feature film. So I would like to ask you, what do we have to pay attention to when you are trying to combine feature and documentary? Because this is the first time that I have this experience, my first attempt to do this.
That's a very, very interesting subject that you bring up, Svetlana. I think there's quite a lot of things that we have to pay attention to. First of all, if you're a good documentary director, you're not necessarily a good fiction director. So that is the first question to ask yourself. I guess maybe you have the same experience. I have seen some terrible scenes where documentary directors direct people. It does not always come out very good. So I think that is the first question we should ask ourselves. Does it work? Or will it be a little amateur piece of work because we're not used to directing actors? I think that's the first question we should ask ourselves. The second thing, which I think is really important, is actually what I said before about when you're watching a character-driven film and you forget that you're watching a film. For me, that experience is unpayable. It's one of the reasons why I have done documentary films for 40 years. Because it's so much more emotional than fiction film. Now, I know we experience things differently, but that's how I have it. When I watch a fiction film, there's always a little percentage of me that makes me think, oh, wow, that was a nice shot. Whoa, why did they choose that music? Ah, she is a fantastic actress, you know. I always have a little of that while watching. And I'm not saying it's not enjoyable, but it's different. Because I am aware that I'm watching a film. So that is for me the biggest difference from watching a character-driven documentary film and watching a fiction film. It is the element of presence. And you might want to lose the element of presence. But I think what we need to do it as a conscious decision. It can work. As you can hear, I don't really like it. I have to admit. But it is also because I have become very sensible about it. You know, I know it's a personal thing, but if you get me hooked, if you get me emotionally involved, if I shed a tear because of what happens with my with the persons I follow. And then, bam, I get out of it. I get angry. I get aggressive. Because you took me out of my emotional room. So I know it is a personal thing. But even if we like to do it, if we like those kind of films, I still think that we identify emotionally different with fiction scenes than with documentary scenes. And I think that it's important that the creators are aware of that, that's what happens. So I guess that's, that's maybe the two important things that I would try to be conscious about when you have mockumentaries. I don't know what your thoughts on that is, Svetlana.
Дякую вам дуже. Звичайно,
Thanks a lot. Of course, the first question, I had the first question because I used to work in the documentary, and now I have another path, but I'm studying this topic as much as possible to do it in the best way, because I understand that this would be my debut and I have a lot of challenges in front of me. Yes, I have asked myself whether I'm ready to do it emotionally, because I was very close to my character, and what happened to him had an impact on me a lot. But I didn't want to leave this story, so the only way for me to shoot a feature film, to show, so that people would know about him, to show people his unique life. I will be using your piece of advice as well. I will be trying to do this as much as possible, to hook people, to do some emotional, and to give something back to people, some new emotions and some new understanding, some new knowledge. Thank you.
And actually, Svetlana, when you talked, I came to think of that maybe it's also a matter of what is the main element in the film? What is the main driving force in the film? Because I think if the main driving is real people, what we can call the documentary drive, and then you interrupt it, so to speak, with fictional scenes, I think it's very different from if I see your film as primarily a fiction film, and then you have some real people in it as well. I think it's actually two quite different films. When I come out of the cinema after having seen your film, would I say, I saw a documentary, but there were also some stage scenes in it? Or will I say, I saw a fiction film, but there were actually also some real characters in it, you know? I think that's two very different ways of seeing a film. I can see that there are now two questions in the chat. Should we take them now, Paulina? On that? Yeah. One question is, could you please talk a bit about some example or just a driven film when the director is a character, a personal story? We see it a lot. I don't know how strong a tradition it is in Ukraine, but in Western Europe, and if I should take my own country, Denmark, we really, really see it a lot. 15, 20 years ago, it was almost a no-go. We're not allowed to make personal films. And now I really see it a lot. I personally find it a very interesting genre. And it has a big advantage that when I talked about character-driven film, I talked about how it gets out of your control because you don't know what the real people do, you know. You thought you were going to make a film about people who live in the city, and then suddenly they decide to move to the country. Oops, my film changed, you know. But if it's a personal film, you are on one, at the same time you are following yourself, but you are also kind of in control of yourself. You know, the same person is the director and the main character, and I think it opens for some difficult things, because I think that sometimes the director, let's say it's me, sometimes director Mikael decides to do something as the private person Mikael because it's good for the film. And then it becomes tricky, huh? But on the other hand, I can, for instance, say, I will do a very personal voiceover because I think it helps the film. But it will be the character, Mikael, that does the voiceover, not the director, Mikael, that does the voiceover. So I think there are some holes that you can fall in, because you may invent things because it's good for the film. And then sometimes I think the audience can sense it. But on the other hand, it also gives you the freedom to have elements in your film that you could not have if it was not yourself. So I think it is tricky, but I think it can be absolutely wonderful. And there's another good thing. You're with your main character all the time, right? You just need to have a camera by your bedside. So there's a lot of advantages with personal films, I think. But there are also some pitfalls that you can fall into. That's another question. How much time do you think documentalists must spend with characters to make him be himself, to forget about the camera? Maybe you can give some advice to make it faster. And then there's a smiley. Yeah. I've heard DOPs say very different things about this. Some of them say, I always bring my camera from the very first moment I visit my character. Always. Because I want the character to experience me as the person with the camera. Where there are other directors, DOPs, who always do the opposite. They always spend time with their characters first, and only when they feel that the character is now totally relying on the director, trusting the director, feeling safe with the director, only then do they take up the camera. I don't think you can say that one method is better than the other. I think it's a matter of personality. But I guess you can say, because in the question here, we also had the question about how can we make it happen faster? I guess that if you do it from the very beginning, there is probably a tendency that it will go fast. but I think that's basically what I can say about that. Yeah, and I think it takes the time it takes. I don't think you can say anything in general. I think sometimes it takes 2 days, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes 2 hours. I really think it's difficult to say something in general about it. Any other experiences or questions?
Мікаель, у нас є питання, які
Mikael, we have questions
записані учасниками під час
that have been sent from the participants during the registration. If you don't mind, we can read those questions. Maybe there are some
Absolutely.
personal questions. Maybe we could
Also
answer some personal
now
questions.
one just now one came up in the chat. It's from Alexei, who says, Michael, you said it's important to not separate picture and sound. But what about scenes where the character tells us something about himself and we see his everyday routine while hearing the story? Just to be clear, what I said about that is that, of course, you can do it, but you need to be conscious about what happens when you do it. And I think that one of the interesting things is that when you do not separate picture and sound, when you always keep the unity of time and space, so that what you hear is what happens with what you see, I think you leave a bigger, one thing, I talked about the emotional presence. That's one thing. But I also think that you leave a bigger room for interpretation with the viewer. Because if you hear me say something, and then you decide to illustrate it with some scenes from my, as you write, Alexei, everyday routine, then you decide how to interpret what I say, right? Because you decide to use scene A and not scene B to illustrate what I'm saying. So there is a bigger interpretation from your side as a director if you choose to do that. If I say something about emotions and you choose to illustrate it with a scene where I'm happy, I'm smiling, or with a scene where I'm sad, you have decided how to understand what I'm saying about emotions. So I think that's one thing that happens. It's not only that you become aware that you're watching a film and thereby is out of your closeness with the film. It's also that you interpret, you the director, interpret on behalf of the audience. So I think that's another element of this separation of time and space. The funny thing is that this is very often what the journalist does. You see it much more in a journalistic driven film, that time and space is separated. You hear a voiceover. But the journalist's ambition is to be objective. But I think that by doing that, the journalist is more subjective. because he or she interpret on the audience behalf. So it's an interesting thing. Maybe a journalist would disagree 2000% with me. It might be, but that's just how I see it. Was that what you meant with your question, Alexei? Oh, I see. You have added something. For example, my character is a very lonely person, so he keeps talking to me all the time. That's nice. But why don't we see him talking to you then? What's the problem about that? You don't want us to see that he's talking to you, or how is it?
Олексій, ви можете вімкнути мікрофон і поговорити.
Alexei, you can unmute and talk. Thank you.
Mikael, he was telling about his disabilities and his emotions, but I thought that there's too much of his talking. So I felt like the emptiness with some his routine and everyday work to like show more information about him and to fill the emptiness.
Yeah, but of course you can choose to do that. Of course you can choose to do that. Absolutely. But my point is just that you need to be conscious about what you achieve by doing it. And I don't know, because I haven't seen your shootings, Alexei, but just from what you write, by doing so, maybe you lower the level of emptiness. So if you want to show how empty his life is, maybe you would go against that if you have scenes where he's working. But I don't know, because I have not seen your material. It's just a thought I got from what you told me, Alexei. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another question from Dimitru. In this context, what do you think about method in Gunda? What is that? The Victor Kosakovsky. I've only seen a trailer, I have to admit, so I'm so sorry. I have not seen the full film. Watching the trailer was enough for me to take it as an example, but I haven't seen the full film, so I'm sorry. I cannot really say that. Then there's one from Marina. What do you think about uses of music in documentary film in terms of unity of time and space? Can you tell about music in documentary? Yeah. How shall I say? You know, I produced a documentary once where when people saw the credit list, they noticed that the composer was a very well-known Danish musician and composer. And several of them came to me after and said, "What? I didn't notice that there was music in the film." So that was very interesting, because he had composed, and then when you listen to it, it's so obvious that there's music. I mean, there's instruments, there's melody and everything. But he composed the music so that it emotionally came together with the scenes. So we forgot that there was music. So that's one thing I think you should think about. Is that the feeling you want us to have? Do you want us to forget that there's music? But you want the music to underline something, but you just do it in a way so that we forget that it's music. Or do you really want us to experience that it's music? That's two very different ways of doing it. I'm gonna say something that I could be very wrong, but I'll say it just to exemplify what I mean. I think there are two different kinds of subtext. And I think sometimes we use music to explain the subtext, because the subtext is not clear enough in the scene. So if you have a scene and you want us to understand that this is a scene where the character is a little sad because he thinks of his late mother, then maybe you have a music theme that represents mother. Because we can't see what a person is thinking. That's one way of using music, so that it's kind of a subtext. It represents a subtext that is not in the scene, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you want the scene to be a little more melancholic than it is in itself. So you add melancholic music. What is the name? What is the name of the second name of the Ukrainian director that is doing this film called? She's called Olga, and she has edited several. She has edited two of the films that we are showing. I think she edited This Rain Will Never Stop. Olga what? She's now doing a film about, there we are, Olga Zurba. Thank you very much. I'm terrible with names. Olga Zurba. She's just finalizing a film now about a Roma boy. Maybe you know about it. And she gave it a different title than Roma. That was the working title. Does any of you know? Anyway, I discussed with her. She had an opening sequence where this boy that she followed throughout the film, it's a totally character-driven film. But she had an opening scene where the boy runs through a cornfield, and the corn is higher than he is. That works very well in the beginning, I think, because then it's an introduction of a boy who runs through this field. Then he goes through hell in the film. It's really a tough film to watch. Then she did the same at the opening, at the ending. So the same scene in the beginning was fine because it was an opening. It was a boy running through a cornfield. When she used the same scene at the end, you won't see it in the film. It was only in the rough cut because she took it out. But when she used the same scene at the end, it was only subtext, because we knew that that boy that we had followed for 1.5 hours was not running around in cornfields. But it was her visual interpretation of his state of mind. But then the scene was only subtext. if you understand what I mean. And then it becomes a cliche. If there is no real action, but only subtext, then the subtext becomes a cliche. But if there is real action, and you yourself read the subtext in the scene, then it's beautiful and not a cliche. I don't know if this was clear, but I mention it now because I had the same with music. If I have the feeling that now the director needs this music because the emotions are not in the scene in itself, so the director introduces music, then I feel that the music becomes a cliche. Maybe you see it differently, but that's how I see music in documentary film. If it feels natural, it works fine. If I become aware, now there's music, I wonder why the director chose this, then I don't think it works. Was that was a very long answer to a short question. But was it okay, Maria? Okay. Maria smiles. I take it as a yes. Then there's another question. If you have many potential characters for documentary, do you have a criteria to choose the main character? Yes, I do have criteria. We could start with if we go to fiction for a moment, but I think exactly the same applies for documentary. That the definition of the main character is that it is the character that holds the biggest conflict. So in a way, you don't choose your main character, because we will automatically identify most with the character in your film that holds the biggest dilemma or conflict or whatever we call it. You know, if there is a character in your film that don't really know what job she wants to have, and you have another character in your film that don't know, that loves two people at the same time and don't know which one he should choose, the second one will be your main character and not the first one. So I think that's one thing to consider when you have main characters that the audience will decide. And you better have made the same decision as the audience, because otherwise you have a problem. The other thing is that it depends, of course, what your film is about. Because your main character needs to hold in his or her personal story what your film is about. Otherwise, you also have a problem. So I think these are the two answers to that. The kind of dilemma or whatever that your character has that will make us emotionally identify that will automatically be your main character. And the second thing is the character has to carry the story you want to tell or the theme you want to address in his or her personal life. And maybe a third thing, usually, you can have two characters, and one is evil and the other one is good. Now that's two characters. But if you have one character that holds both a big evilness and a big, I don't think you would say goodness, but that has both an evil side and a good side within them, that is usually the definition of the best possible character. If the big fight between good and evil is not between two persons, but is inside the same person, that is usually the best possible character you can get. Was that an answer to someone that has a name that I cannot read? But yeah, there you are.
Pavlo Dorotov.
Exactly. Was it okay? Okay.
Микаеле, дозвольте, я ще задам
Mikael, I would like to ask a question from our participants during the registration for the seminar. They ask how to shoot a film about the past without reconstructions, without interviews. Maybe you could give some examples.
Yeah.
This was a question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not so easy. I produced once a film that is called The German Secret. It's about a woman who is in her 50s. She was left by her mother when she was a little baby. Right after she was born, her mother gave her away to her own mother, so the child's grandmother. And when this woman turned 50, she decided, I need to find out, why did mother give me away? Of course, it's been a trauma throughout her whole life. You could also say that she needed to find out, why does mother not love me? So she decided to go to places and meet people that she knew her mother met right after she had given away the baby. So we needed to tell the backstory in the film. We needed to understand the backstory. So actually the backstory was the main part of the story. What happened back then and why. So we chose 3 different ways to do it. One was the meetings that the character had with these persons. So through the meetings, these persons told something about the backstory. Before we started, we made a 3-hour-long talk with our main character, where she told the whole story of what she knew at the time. And we used that interview a lot. She was a good storyteller. So people didn't conceive it as an interview. The audience experienced it as part of the storytelling, but it was actually an interview. Thirdly, we had a lot of archive. And the guidance for the archive was that it had to reflect the personal story of the character. Meaning that it was not enough that it told something about the time back then. It had to be incorporated in the character's personal story, so that people would see it not as archive, but as the personal story. And I think that is the trick. If we can have someone retell stories that happened in the past, then we will not think that it's an interview. If the archive adds to the personal story and does not illustrate it, then we will not see it as archive. If a voiceover adds to what we see at the very time where the voiceover comes, we will not think, here's a voiceover. We will see it as a new way of telling the story. I could also say it in another way. Very often voiceover stops the drive of the film. Very often archive stops the drive of the film. But if archive and voiceover continues the drive of the film, I don't think we will see it as such. And then I think it works. And it is a very, very, very relevant question, because in 9 out of 10 documentaries, we start filming because something happened. That's what makes us film. It's not so often that we start filming because before the thing that triggered the story happens, right? So it's a really, really relevant question.
Дякую.
Thank you.
І ще я
And do I have time for one more question?
також
We have 5 more minutes.
дякую.
Thank you. Our participants also ask how to bring out the main idea of the film without saying it, without voicing it.
Yeah.
How to convey the main idea of the film without openly voicing it, without saying it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little difficult to be concrete here, but I can start very unconcrete if you will allow me. It happened so many times that I've seen a film and I found the way of storytelling very subtle, very delicate. And then when I watch it again and see the opening scene, I go, how on earth can they say so clearly in the opening scene what the film is about? But I can only see that they showed it very clearly in the opening scene when I had the knowledge of what the film is about. So I know that was not a very concrete answer, but it's finding a scene oh, if we were only together now, then I could show you a little trailer that would totally exemplify what I'm trying to say. But it's finding a scene. It also depends what we mean by what the film is about. If it's a portrait, start with the character that you're making a portrait of. I know this sounds so obvious, but it's not. But it depends, because if you buy about means, is it about love or hate or war or anger or despair? You know, the bigger themes. I think you can have a scene that holds that in the beginning, but it holds it so delicately that I don't consciously say, it's a film about love. But I unconsciously understand it. I think that is the trick. I know it's still a little unconcrete, but you know, I took script writing at the Danish Film School when I was young. And I remember what the head of the film school, of the script writing said. He said, there are only two possibilities in a scene. Either you send me in the wrong direction, in my understanding, or you send me in the right direction. And it always stayed with me. Because of course, the opening scene has to send me in the right direction in my understanding of your film. It has to be subtle, it has to be delicate, but it has to. Because if the opening scene does not send me in the right direction, it will send me in the wrong direction. And then it will take you half an hour to get me back on the right track. Because I think that's what we decide unconsciously from the very first second. This is what the film is about. But if it's someone who tells me, hello, you're now going to watch a film about love, then I will run out of the cinema. But if it's a little beautiful scene with a mother, and she looks down at her little daughter who is lying sleeping beside her, and you see this little smile. It's a film about love. So that's what I mean by it has to be subtle, but I think it has to be there in the opening scene. And I know many people who disagree 100% with me on that, but I think so.
Дякую.
Thank you. I'm sorry, can I ask a question? I also have a question. Mikael, please tell us, what is your opinion about films without characters, without obvious characters? Yeah, like Loznitsa, just in looking at it in general, or some global issues, but we look at them through some visual abstract frames or voiceover, something like that. I don't
really know what to say to that, Paulina, because it's just a different kind of film, I think. I have seen films that are almost meditative, where there is no main character and there is no character driving it, but it still keeps me. It still keeps my interest. And then I usually have to see the film 3 or 4 times to find out what was it that kept me interested. Because I think that the meditative, if I should use that expression, the meditative feeling when watching a film is a feeling. And to meditate is to be only in the now, if I understand it right. I don't meditate, so I may be terribly wrong, but it seems like it's something where you forget about where you are and you're only in the now. I think you can have that feeling from a film, but the director who edited the film knows exactly what drives it forward. That is one thing I really think there has to be something that drives it forward, no matter what. Also, if it's not a character. And sometimes you just don't know. But I mean, again, just like I said, either you send me in the right direction or you send me in the wrong direction. I think it's the same with this, that if the film is repetitive, I'll leave. I will get bored. There has to be something that adds to my curiosity from one scene to another. There has to be something. And it can be, I guess, again without having seen the film, but I guess that is the case with Viktor Kossakovsky's film about pigs. It is his persistent examination that drives it forward. I don't know exactly what it is. Sometimes, and that is what I refer to with the more journalistic documentaries, sometimes I simply just get wiser. You know, I go, wow, oh, I didn't know that. So sometimes that's what drives it forward. But yeah, I don't know if I answered, Paulina, but yeah, it's a tricky question. But you know, sometimes I hear in presentations and people say it's the town that will be the main character, you know. And I always go, no, that cannot be true. A town cannot be a main character. A town can be the place that you examine, but it cannot be a character. But it may be that as an audience, I experience it as a main character. But a town in itself does not act. A town is not proactive. So that means that the director has to be proactive on behalf of the town. And what is that then? Then it's the director who slowly opens new doors into my understanding of the town. And it can be an emotional understanding or it could be an intellectual understanding. But it still has to be something where the director, when I see scene 124, I say, of course, this had to follow scene 123. Of course it did. I don't think I can get closer than that. Sorry.
Thank you very much. It's very understandable.
Yes.
Мікаеле, у нас, звичайно, є ще питання.
Mikael, of course, we have questions, but I understand that the time is over. Maybe tomorrow we can ask you those questions. Thank you a lot. Thanks to all the participants, to those who turned on their cameras, and to those who asked questions.
Actually, yes. I mean, if people feel that it makes sense and has the time to be there tomorrow, quite a few of the things that I will address will touch upon the same things, but from a different angle. Yeah. It was a pleasure. Next year in Kiev, right? But bye-bye from my Copenhagen desk.
До побачення. Дякуємо,
Дякую.
Мікаеле.
Дякую.
Goodbye. Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot, Mikael. Thanks to everybody. See you tomorrow.